Bonjour à tous et à toutes.
Hello everyone. It is a delight to be here again this year and to be working on these WIPs. And I'll be here throughout the week if you want to come back. So this is a particularly interesting WIP, and I'd like to thank all of the team for preparing this session, and we're going to discover this together. And we're going to start with Nicolas DUFOUR-LAPERRIERE. If you could come onto the stage, please.
À rejoindre la salle. Nicolas est né à Saguenay, vivant à Montréal.
Nicolas is born in Saguenay, he lives in Montreal. He's been working for 15 years as a cinema producer, and he's produced enormous amounts of documentaries. He's also co-founded a production company. So he has also worked in collaboration with Félix and Hélène Goldberg. Also, this won the prize for the best short in 2021. He's currently working on his first feature film. It's a documentary film, which is called Les Ombres Lumineuses, the Luminous Shadows. A big round of applause.
Je vais demander à Bren Lopez-Cepeda
I'm now
de nous
going
rejoindre.
to ask Bren Lopez-Cepeda to come
Qui
on
est venu avec
stage.
son fan club apparemment.
Who's come with
C'est
her
une
fan club,
cinéaste et
clearly.
animatrice néo-mexique
So is
basée à
an
Montréal.
animator
Après le succès
and
de son film de
filmmaker who's
traduction de
Mexican,
l'université
based in Montreal,
ABO en
and she
2018.
studied
Elle a
at
travaillé sur 3 productions
Columbia
de l'ONF
University.
et sur 2 longs
She
métrages d'animation
worked on her
indépendants.
she worked with ONF, and she worked also on Unité Centrale, and now she works with Embuscade. She's worked on an animated short as part of the Rêve ton futur program, that was in 2024, and a 2D animated short that was also directed by ONF. So now she's working on several short projects as assistant director, and she focuses very much on the imperfect dimension of life that defines us. She thinks that the role of an artist is to basically wage an irresistible revolution, or make revolution an irresistible tool. Now I'd like to call David Seitz onto the stage.
David est un animateur, compositeur et développeur
He's
d'outils
both an
basé à Montréal,
animator
accompli, il fait
and a
également de la magie,
composer
du
based in
compositing et des
Montreal.
effets spéciaux
He
pour
is
ses
a
pairs
real
et collaborateurs.
magician in terms of composing and
Profondément curieux
compositing.
et
And he's
pathologiquement indépendant, ça
deeply,
aussi j'aime bien.
indeed,
David a suivi une
curious,
trajectoire
and he's
unique en
very
art, en
independent in
programmation, en
his
design,
way
en
he
enseignement et en
works.
recherche.
He
Il s'épanouit grâce
works
à
in
l'humour, le
design,
recueillir et
and
de
he
bons problèmes à
loves
résoudre.
discovering new pastures, new shores, and learning
Voilà, je
things.
vous
He's
demande
extremely
d'accueillir maintenant
curious.
Eugene Park,
Now I'd like to call onto stage Eugene Park,
animatrice et réalisatrice
who's an animator
canado-coréenne basée
and
à Montréal,
a
au Québec,
director.
en
She is
travaillant sur une
Canadian,
variété de
based in
productions, tant au sein des
Montreal.
studios que des productions
So
indépendantes.
she works
Elle a
both in the
découvert
studio
une
Embuscade,
passion
but
pour
she's
la
also
technique et la
independent.
narration du
She's a
cinéma
freelance.
d'animation.
She works on
Elle
both the
assiste à la
technique and the
l'ONF,
storytelling side of animation. She's worked with ONF, and she works mainly for Embuscade Film. She's passionate about her art, and she focuses especially on independent cinema. She loves nature and its connection with humanity, and she is fascinated with the horror genre. And she tries to find ways of sharing emotion and also experiences by having a very direct approach to all the different cultures around the world and focusing on this notion of transforming cultures to others.
Et enfin, Félix
And finally,
DUFOUR-LAPERRIERE.
Félix DUFOUR-LAPERRIERE. Onto the stage, please.
Félix est né en 80 à Chicoutimi, au Québec.
So he was born in Quebec. He's both producer, screenwriter, and director. He worked on the documentary Transatlantic that was presented in many festivals, and it was a national and international event at the time and won many awards. Villeneuve, that came out in 2018, that was purely ink on paper animation. So that premiered at the Mostra de Venise, and that is a wonderful film. So he has another film, Archipel, that was selected for Rotterdam and won an Annecy Award, and then went on to be shown across the world. Now this is here we're moving on to his current feature film, Death Does Not Exist. So he's both director and producer, and he worked with Myriam Faz at the RAYNAL Forum for that particular project. And I learned something, and that is that if Félix is wearing glasses today, it's not just because he needs them, it's because he wants to look good. It's a little extra detail. So, to start off,
Peux-tu, Nicolas, nous présenter
Could
Embuscade Film
Nicolas, you could tell us about
qui,
Embuscade Film,
pour produire La mort n'existe pas.
which brings all of you
Oui.
together and obviously is the
Merci, Patrick.
producer of Death Does Not
Bonjour tout le
Exist.
monde,
Thank you,
puis
Patrick.
merci d'être
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for
très
being here
heureux
today.
d'avoir
I'm
été
delighted to
Embuscade
present to you
travailler un peu.
Embuscade and the work
Rapidement
that
donc,
we're focusing on at the
Embuscade
moment.
Film fondé en 2013.
So, Embuscade Film was founded in
Qui
1993. We're a
accompagnons
studio
et
and production company
l'animation
that help and
traditionnelle,
accompany
principalement évidemment d'auteurs.
animated
On peut
films
dire
and also
que Embuscade, c'est un peu fondé sur
documentaries.
un quiproquo en fait,
So
et sur un
basically, it was
premier
founded on
film
this idea that we had this
qui devait
challenge,
être un court-métrage
Transatlantic, which was our
d'animation
first film. It was supposed to be an animated short,
basé sur des images filmées en mer sur un
and it
canot,
was
en
using
Embuscade.
images that were filmed on out at
Voyage de
sea
tournage qu'on a fait,
on a commercial boat, and
voyage
it
qui devait
was
durer 8
filmed
jours, il en a
using
duré
images that we made
32,
ourselves.
et court-métrage
It was supposed to
d'animation
take
qui a
8
finalement
days. It ended up
été un long-métrage
lasting
documentaire
32.
à
So
la
it
sortie
started
de
off as a
l'année.
short and ended up as a 72-minute feature-length film. So it was a bit of a misunderstanding there. It was a big surprise. So it's both animation and documentary, and those are the cornerstones of Embuscade. So we switch, if you like, between these two different mediums, and that being the case in the last 10 years. Archipel is again another example of the work that we've carried out on those two fronts. So we're based in Montreal, and we bring together a very strong community of animators, filmmakers, especially focused on documentary. And Embuscade was lucky to build around itself many different strong collaborations with people working on very handmade traditional techniques. And that has been the case for the last decade. So we've been there to help them in terms of the production side, but also to launch into new adventures. And we've been having long-standing relationships with people such as Jin. I think we've been working with you for 8 years now. So that's a wonderful collaboration. Bren, for 7 years, we've been working together. Is that it? So yes, we have lots of different collaborations and working partnerships that we've been developing over these last few years. And, obviously, everybody who works with us shows an amazing ability to be generous-hearted and generous-minded with their talent, and also to find solutions when faced with difficulties. So I talk about this notion of generosity and be able to find solutions, being resourceful. I'm talking about the production side, and obviously we know it's a very long process. And on this particular film, we've been working on it for the last 6 years, and we've also been working with other producers in the room here, Emmanuel-Alain. So we're working with MIYU Productions. Are they in the room? Yes, they are. Tanguy's here too. So Emmanuel-Alain and Pierre BAUSSARON, again, they've shown us wonderful generosity and resourcefulness, from the other side of the Atlantic, both, in all the work that they do. So we'd like to thank them very much for the collaboration there with MIYU Productions. And, thank you for being here today with us. And to conclude the introduction to Embuscade films, well, here we have many different partners, obviously. I'm just going to name a few here. In Quebec, we got Sodec, Téléfilm Canada, Crédit d'Impôt, which is another program. In France, we have partnerships with Région Sud, the Aquitaine region, Polymage Magelis, Charente Cinéma, the BFF. I think there's someone from the BFF here in the room. Hélène Martin, Maison 4-3, and finally UFO, which is our French distributor. So thank you to all of those who've joined us on this adventure. It's been a real joy to work on this project, and it's wonderful to see the result that we have come up with so far. And, things are looking good in terms of our future progress. Thank you for giving us this overview of Embuscade. Félix, how did this project come to life? What are the major themes that you are addressing here? It's an adventure film here, but what are you really talking about in the film? Thank you, Patrick. Yes, indeed, it's an adventure film, and it began, I think the first few lines were written about 10 years ago. So it's a tragic tale. And it's about the notion of impossibility. It's about the fact that violence is impossible. And if that be the case, what does one do? So if that is impossible, what is there left? What is there left to save in this world if the impossible doesn't exist? So that's a little bit about the story. So to give you more detail, the story is lots of different symmetries and repetitions and loops, if you like, of two different dualities, if you like, and tragic dualities here. So it's a story about a group of young characters, and Hélène is the main character that you can see on the screen, and also Manon. So this group of young people are attacked in this amazing, beautiful, sumptuous landscape, and and this is the area in which they live. So they are attacked. And so this is a symbol of how the status quo is being turned on its head. Danger enters into their world, as well as desire and fruitfulness.
Hélène
she catches the eye of somebody who is part of that attack. And unfortunately, she leaves her group. She leaves them behind. The attack obviously goes wrong. Things don't end up well. They ended up stuck in the forest. And so she catches up with one of the members of her group who offers a pact, which gives the opportunity to her to go back and rethink the choices that she's made. So it's, if you like, the gift of having a second chance, to be able to relive the attack and behave differently. So we journey through the valley to go back to the starting point of the story. And here, Hélène will try to be able to... Here she meets Villeneuve, who is a character that enables her to bring to life her deepest desires and to be able to then control them once that she's managed to face up to the notion of violence. And it also gives her this extraordinary power to bring people back to life. So to summarize, you know, this is a very interesting journey that she goes on. It's very dark. It's a little bit like Alice in Wonderland, if you like, with a little bit more of a darker edge. So Hélène comes across and meets doubles, if you like, people who reflect her character, who reflect who she was back at the time when she made that decision, and characters who enabled her to take part in the attack. So it's not necessarily a quest about becoming better, but it's the idea of staying true to your convictions and to take stock and responsibility of what you have done, and to know what are the driving forces within you that could really turn the world upside down. So it's not just a dark film, you know, it's an adventure film. There's a lot of, it's very dynamic. There's lots of movement, but it's also a film about links in terms of love, amorous links, but also political engagement, political links and connections, and the notion of freedom, being free in terms of our choices. So yes, it is tragic. It's about the brutality of life. It's about resistance, but there's also a positive edge. And as I said earlier, this film is built on the notion of duality, the duality between immobility and movement, between what is static, statues, for example, where they live, there's this sort of greenhouse full of statues that represent the artificial side of the established order, if you like. And at the same time, this immobility is obviously shaken up by the movement, the natural dynamic of life itself. So that brings the story back into the real domain. So the first version of the story was quite dark, and when I wrote this, it actually was quite an interesting exercise for me, because when I came out with the first ideas, it was quite sticky. You know, it really stuck to me. But as I developed it and I worked on it further, it stuck less. It was less sticky, if you like. And I had greater freedom. And there was a wonderful Italian that I met on a co-production project, and she said, you always have to let life guide you. You have to be at the service of life. And I think she was right, that Italian collaborator with whom I worked years ago. So in that spirit, I managed to move away from what I was originally writing in the first version of the story, bring out some of the darkness, but free myself from that at the same time. But don't forget, this is about friendship, this is about love, this is about loyalty, and these are other commitments that, you know, if you like, are connected to the rest of the story, and they feed into each other. So that's something that I brought out later in the writing process. This is a narrative film. It's very much about telling stories. My previous film, Archipel, was, if you like, experimental. It was an essay, if you like. It was more open, it was more revolutionary, more disruptive, if you like. It was a juxtaposition of different images, like a collage, laying we had the notion of the real side, and we had real images, real photos, and we drew images on top, we superimposed them.
Le premier film, Villeneuve, est
And the
aussi
first film that I made,
narratif,
Villeneuve,
mais,
again was
sur
very
un mode, disons,
narrative,
je dirais détendu. Les
but that was
enjeux
a lot wider, a lot looser.
sont plus délicats.
It wasn't the same
C'est un
challenge.
film sur la
You know,
relation
it
de
was,
couple. Donc, je suis parti
again, it was a
du
film
film en noir
about
et
a
blanc, qui était
relationship
plutôt,
between a couple. It was in black and
délicat,
white.
plutôt tendre.
It was a lot more delicate, if you
Un
like,
film
more
très éclaté,
toned
très coloré
down, if you
pour
like.
approcher l'amour n'existe pas sous un principe de tension.
So I wanted to move
Dualité,
towards
je
something with a
dis,
greater
entre
sense of
mobilité
tension.
et le
And I
mouvement,
said
mais
earlier on,
aussi
I
entre
wanted to find this
les chocs,
juxtaposition
le choc
between
des
dynamic
couleurs,
and being
il y a une
immobile,
palette
being
très
static.
franche. David
And
nous en
also I
parlait
want
tout à
to
l'heure,
use
vous parlez
very,
d'une palette
very
très
stark
tranchée,
contrasts
de
in terms of
positions
the colors to
graphiques
bring
aussi,
out that
qui sont toute
tension
une
in
partie du
graphic
récit,
terms, in
c'est-à-dire
visual
les
terms.
personnages ne sont pas détachés
So what I wanted
nécessairement
to
des
show
scènes.
that the
Vous allez
characters are not
constater avec
detached from the
avec
action. They're very much integrated into the visual realm. They're
les
part of
exemples
the
qu'on va vous
action.
montrer. C'est le mouvement
And we're going to
parfois
show
qui les
you some
révèle. Et puis,
examples. And the
les
movement
jeux de
brings
mise en
out that
scène sur
duality too.
le
And
fait
the
que
staging, the way I
figures émergent
directed
du
it.
décor qui les accueille,
And
des
you can
lieux
see
qui les
how
accueillent. Et à
figures and
l'inverse, les
images
lieux
emerge from the
émergent
backgrounds.
également
And
des
again,
personnages
places
qui nous
emerge
présentent,
and
vous savez. Donc,
backgrounds
le film
emerge
est à
from
la
the
fois
characters themselves. So
la,
this
la,
is
la,
kind of
la
loop, this mise en
déambulation
abîme of
et
the different
à
characters and backgrounds
travers ses propres
integrating
dilemmes et
with
sa
each
propre
other.
psyché
So this
d'Hélène.
is
Donc, le
something
monde
which
est conçu,
enables you to
l'émanation de
underline
son
the notion of the
intériorité, de son
characters really
trou,
trying to
des
overcome their own
tensions
dilemmas,
qui
their own
l'habitent.
inner turmoil. So you can see the
C'est
tension
un
being
film, donc,
played
on
out
disait
in
qu'on
both the
peut dire
characters
c'est une
and the
coproduction heureuse
backgrounds. So this is a
avec MIYU.
co-production
C'est un film
with
qui,
MIYU
par les
Productions.
exigences narratives qu'il
And
porte
obviously,
et
there were
par
very
également
strong, very high
les
standards
exigences de la
and
coproduction, on a
in
dû,
terms of the
on a
narrative.
dû préparer beaucoup
We
plus
had
que
a very
les
strong
autres
ambition in
films.
that respect.
Euh,
So it was a very
il y
different
avait
exercise
un layout,
compared
une
to
mise
our
en place
previous
très précise
films. So we had a very
qui nous a bien servi
specific
pour la coproduction
structure,
d'ailleurs, qui
which
s'est très
helped
bien
us
déroulée à
in
ce
terms
moment-là
of
parce qu'on
co-production.
avait
And it went
établi
very well because we really
des
set out
structures
from the
visuelles
outset
très précises.
a visual
Et puis,
structure that was very
donc,
precise, and we followed
mes
that
amis
throughout. So that was an
collaborateurs français
interesting
ont
and
pu
important guideline,
rajouter
and that we set up with our
cette
French
coupe très précise
partners,
sans
co-partners.
en ayant un cadre bien établi. Donc, ça a été
And that
une
gave us a very
expérience
strong
que j'ai trouvée
and
très
solid
heureuse.
framework. And I thought it was a very
Et
positive
donc, nous
experience that
avions
to work in that
le
way.
défi de garder la liberté. Nous,
So
on
the
fait du cinéma
challenge was to
artisanal, c'est-à-dire
keep
qu'on
a sense of
approche la
freedom, because
fabrication d'un
obviously
film
when you work
dans
in
un strict
cinema,
autorat, et
you're
puis dans une
you want
logique,
to be able to have
il
control, if you
faut
like, of what
protéger le
you're
dispositif
showing,
et
but
la
at the same
réflexion
time, you
et,
want to be able to
les
protect the
exigences
notion of there
sont
being
au cœur
literary
des
devices and
besoins du film.
schemes to ensure that
Donc,
that
on est au cinéma,
creativity
cinéma très
has
d'auteur,
channels in
et
which
puis
it
adapte
can
donc nos modes
express
de
itself. So
fabrication
we're always
à ces
adapting
exigences-là.
ourselves
Je voulais donc
to the needs
conserver la
of the
structure
film.
horizontale qui
So I
caractérise
wanted to
ce
keep the
ce
very
film
horizontal
fabriqué.
structure of the
Cette
way in
espèce
which we made that film.
d'ouverture, et
What I
on
mean by
passe un
that
peu
is this
tard, on
sense of
travaille sans chef de
opening.
section.
You know, we work with different people who
Moi et
break
Bren,
down the
l'assistante réalisatrice, on
sequences.
voit tout le monde
Myself and Bren, who's the assistant
on est
director,
dans un dialogue, il faut avancer
are
vite, mais
constantly
il faut
talking about
aussi
how we want to move forward at each stage of the
il y a
film. So
quelque
it's
chose
very much a
d'organique dans notre
collaboration
façon de
between the
fabriquer
two.
des
And we
films,
work in a very
parce que
holistic,
c'est
organic way,
très
very
précieux.
natural way.
Mais
And it was very,
il y avait
very
de
precious,
larges
that
enjeux et des
collaboration that I have with
calendriers, et puis
Bren. Obviously, there are other challenges, money, schedules,
tout ce
you know, all
réel
of the other
qui
less
se
artistic, more
réalise
realistic
rapidement à la table.
issues that we
Alors,
have to
nous
come
avons
up
fait
against.
nous avons
So
pris la
what we
décision de
did
faire une
is
animatique
this.
très précise avec
We had a very
la
specific
précieuse collègue
animatic
Yun
framework. Again, we
Et
worked with
puis, cette
Yun
animatique
Park,
précise a
who's
pris
here,
1 an et
and that
demi à
specific
fabriquer. Un
animatic that
certain
she
cas,
gave to
il
us
nous a servi de
enabled us
layout.
to have this,
Il y a des séquences qui
to
étaient
have an
très, très
overview.
précises,
That means
puis
that each
d'autres,
sequence was very specific, mapped out in a
séquences un peu
very
plus esquissées.
precise
Ça a
way
été
from the
vraiment
outset.
un
And some of the
exercice
sequences were not quite so well
complexe, je
mapped out
crois, et
or
puis
more
précieux. Et
specific.
puis, je vais laisser
Some were
Jin,
more
j'invite Jin, d'ailleurs, à
comprehensive,
nous en
but I'm
dire
going to let Jin
quelques
tell
mots.
you a bit more
En
about
plus,
that.
Jin ayant animé le personnage principal,
Plus,
Hélène, puis
Jin
ayant structuré
animated
une bonne
Hélène,
partie
the
des
main
animations, elle pourra
character,
vous dire quelques
so she
mots
structured a
sur
lot of the animation. So maybe
approche
she could
du
tell us
mouvement et puis de
a
la
little bit more
fabrication.
about her approach in terms of the movement and the character
Merci beaucoup,
design.
Félix. Bonjour.
Thank you very
je
much,
suis
Félix.
Park,
Hello,
mais
everyone. I'm
Jin,
Jin
tout
Park.
simplement dans la production.
Jin, easily,
Oui, j'étais en
is better.
charge de
So,
test
yes,
d'animation,
I was in
l'animatique
charge of the
et
animatic, the animation
l'animation d'Hélène,
tests,
un petit peu de
and obviously
type
animating
également le
Hélène
de la production.
and some of the layouts. So I was the
C'est ma troisième
chief
collaboration
animator on
avec
this
Félix. J'ai
project. So it's my
travaillé
third
sur
film
Villeneuve
with
et
Félix.
Archipel,
I worked on
Emma,
Villeneuve and
Ulysse,
Archipel,
Juvénal
and
et
Emma and
la femme
Ulysse,
dans Archipel.
and it also animated the woman, the female character in Archipel. Félix called me at the end of 2022, and when he called me, I knew that he had a more ambitious project in the pipeline that time, and it was going to really stand out from all the other films he'd made until then. So before it was very much black and white, ink on paper, very varied techniques such as Archipel. This time round, given that this story takes place in a very strange world between life and death, I knew it was going to be a little bit surreal, if you like, unrealistic, irrealistic. And so here are some examples of the tests that we carried out. And this is with our main character, Hélène, to give you an idea. Obviously, she's not quite the same now. She's developed further. But as you can see, we were very much focused on the details for each character in terms of their movement, especially for Hélène. As Félix said, there are waves, undulations in the lines that come to the fore and then disappear into the background. And you can see it in this example with Hélène. Here's another example of Hélène, and you can see the change of pace, change of speed in the movement. So over and above the emotion of the character, what it does, the movement will help slow things down or speed things up. And what we try to do is animate, you do hand-drawn animation as much as possible, because some other techniques really wouldn't be able to express what we're trying to convey in the same way. So we put a lot of focus on hand-drawn animation. This is a big challenge, obviously. The aim here during the production side was to focus on the colors, the textures, which obviously change as the story moves forward. So once we had established those basic factors, we moved into the animatics and also the duration of each sequence. So again, during the production phase, we had to read the scripts, and Félix gives us 2 or 3 images that he wants us to stage with the main characters. So as you can see, he always asks the question, what's going on in the foreground, what's going on in the background? And, we knew that a lot of time was going to be spent on this. And there was lots of preparation that needed to be done, of course, because we were in co-production. First of all, we had to be very detailed. And, I had to also really understand clearly what Félix wanted. What does Hélène want? What motivates her? What are the feelings? What are the thoughts and the emotions going through the head of these characters? And this should be translated into the gestures, the actions, the movement, and also, again, how we plan the rest of the scene and the different sequences. So these dialogues, these discussions were really very interesting and satisfying because, I had a lot of very detailed questions to ask. For example, the motivation behind the actions of each character. And it was great to be able to have these open discussions and come up with suggestions when talking to Félix and Bren. When I had questions, he gave me answers. We were there face to face. Sometimes we had sessions of an hour and a half, really thrashing it out to understand the story better, to understand why this film should be made, why, the characters should be motivated in certain ways. And obviously, we wanted to make the film as complex as possible.
So once the animatic had been done, we could go into the production. What's interesting in our studio is that we didn't really have any model sheets. And Félix had some images that he'd made of the main characters. And then from there, what we did was, okay, you've got we've got sort of flexible shots, because we thought there was going to be a lot of improvisation with the animation. So once in the middle of production, we'd got our recipe well prepared. So that's Manon and Hélène. With the animation test and the animation now. The character animation we didn't have an animation supervisor that was going to oversee the whole project. What we did was what we did depended on the specialities of the animators. They were attributed, they were given a specific character, and so each one had their own animator, if you like, and so to really keep the understanding of the character and to have something that was consistent right through to the end of the production. So it was the same for the in-betweeners, for the colors, for the blocking. We spent some time in production, and the same thing, we gave out the shots depending on people's skills. Communication that we had in the studio
n'importe quelle étape de travail qu'on faisait,
wasn't
Félix était toujours là, toujours vérifié, parce que ça peut être tout
complicated. We
simplement
had
comme ça peut être juste comme le
Félix who
dessin à
was there,
corriger, les notes
and
et
it
passer
could
à
just
la
be
prochaine.
a note, a
Félix avait
correction
vraiment
to make,
assuré d'être
but
présent chaque jour au
Felix
studio,
really
aller voir
was
tout le
really there
monde,
all the
peu
time,
importe l'étape de travail,
and
et avec
who could help
également
everybody,
beaucoup
whatever
de
stage of the
suggestions qui a vraiment
process they were
donné
in, and
à
make
la
suggestions,
satisfaction comme
which
directeur et
really
la communication que
was very
nos
good in terms of communication.
suggestions soient bien entendues.
And
Et ça a aussi permis
this meant
aux
that
artistes de s'engager
the
personnellement,
artists could be
techniquement
personally
et
committed,
expérience
technically
personnelle aussi.
committed, and their
Je pense
personal
que j'ai dit beaucoup
experience
par
as well
rapport à
could come into play.
l'animation.
So I think I
Si
said
je peux
quite a
dire
lot
un petit
about
peu
the
rapidement
animation
sur le
now.
layout, oui, on était
On the
vraiment,
layout,
comme on
very
restait simple,
briefly,
sur TV Paint et scénario-image, animatique,
we
layout,
used
ça restait
utility
comme
paint,
l'étape.
center image
Pour passer aux
for the
animateurs, ça prend
storyboard,
juste quelques notes ou les pauses
and
plus une peu plus.
so
Mais pour la coproduction avec MIYU,
for the
on a
co-production
dû
with MIYU,
assurer qu'il y a assez de
we had to make
références
sure
et
that
de
there were enough
clichés,
references
et ça,
and
je vais
key
passer la
poses.
parole pour expliquer.
And now I'm going to hand over to
Petit
Bren
problème
for
de
the
timing,
rest.
on n'est pas bien en avance.
Just for the timing, we're not ahead of
C'est
time. Let's
l'histoire de la
put it that
production,
way.
ça.
But that's what a general production is like in any case.
Alors, bonjour.
Okay, thank you, Jun.
Et,
So hello, everybody.
je m'appelle Bran et je suis
I'm
l'assistante
called Bren.
réalisatrice sur le
I'm
projet
assistant
Festival.
director
Et pour donner
on
un petit
this
peu de
project,
contexte,
Death Does
ça va
Not
être une histoire
Exist, and
assez
just to
similaire
give you
comme Jin. C'est
some
ma troisième
context, it's a bit
collaboration
like
avec
Jin.
Félix sur son troisième long métrage.
It's the
J'avais
third time
commencé
I've
en
worked
fait
with
comme
Felix on
stagiaire
his third
sur
film, and I
Villeneuve.
started as a trainee
Je
on
faisais de la colo
Villeneuve.
toute la journée sur papier.
I was
C'est
just
ce que
coloring
je
in all
voulais
day
faire
on
quand
paper,
j'ai
which
fini
was
mon
my
bac
dream.
à l'université.
When I finished
Après ça,
my
j'ai travaillé comme animatrice sur
high school, then
Archipel,
I worked as
mais
an
aussi
animator
comme
on
assistante
Archipel,
réelle sur la mort
and here I am
un rôle qui est
as
assez
assistant
large et
director on Death Does
flexible,
Not
vu
Exist.
que, comme
And you've
Félix a
got to be very
expliqué un peu,
flexible
on
because, as
est
Felix
un
explained,
petit studio
we're a small
avec
studio
des gens super travaillants, donc
with, people who
on se
work
répartit
really
les
hard,
tâches
and
de suivi de
we
production.
distribute the jobs.
Et j'aimerais bien vous parler en
We
fait
follow
un
the
peu plus
production
de
well,
comment ça se passe au studio
and
et
so we want
comment,
to, make
comment
sure that
nous,
everything goes
Félix
well
et
in the
moi,
studio.
on suit le
And
travail de tout le monde. Et
Felix and I,
plus
we sort
concrètement,
of
le
supervise
pipeline
everybody's
d'animation.
works, and more
Donc,
concretely, the actual animation pipeline.
Embuscade.
So here we
Comme
are
Félix
at
a mentionné,
Embuscade.
on a vraiment une
As
façon de travailler plus
Felix
horizontale
mentioned,
qui n'est pas commune,
we've
mais
got a
qui
very
rend vraiment le
horizontal way of
travail
working,
et
which is not
l'ambiance de travail
common,
beaucoup plus agréable et
but it
je
makes
pense
things much more
qui
pleasant
engage vraiment
as a
les
working
artistes à se sentir
environment, and
écoutés et engagés sur leur travail. Et puis,
so
en
the
parlant de
artists are really
travail,
much more
notre
committed to
premier
their
outil de
work.
travail,
Talking of
peut-être
work,
que
our
plusieurs d'entre
first
vous reconnaissent
working
Kitsu.
tool, you might
C'est
recognize
notre
Kitsu here.
logiciel de suivi de travail. C'est une
This
entreprise
is
française.
it's
Et
a French
peut-être,
company,
si vous ne les connaissez pas, vous connaissez
and if
peut-être
you don't know
ShotGrid,
them,
qui est
you might know
un outil
ShotGrid,
similaire. Nous,
which is
on
a
travaille sur
similar
Kitsu
tool,
pour faire le suivi de tous les plans et toutes les
and we
tâches.
work with this for
Et comme je
all the
mentionnais, Félix et moi, on se partage
plan,
quand
all
même
the
une vue
shots, all the
d'ensemble,
tasks,
vraiment de chaque plan, chaque
and we have
tâche.
an
Et on se
overview,
partage le travail
and
et
we
suit
split up the work,
de plus près
and
l'animation, tout ce qui est
I'm
ligne,
closer to
décor et
animation, to the
compositing.
line, to the
Et
decors,
moi, je fais
and
un
the
suivi
compositing,
plus précis pour
and I
l'équipe
do more
colo et
supervision as well on the coloring
et puis j'ai choisi
and
cette image
lighting.
aussi pour vous montrer à quel
So
point
I
des fois
chose this
c'est
image to show you
nos plans les plus ambitieux. Puis des fois
that
on
these
donne
are
beaucoup de notes, c'est toutes
ambitious.
les
There are
petites lignes
ambitious
rouges, mais on a des
shots.
artistes qui
The little red lines there
qui sont très
are
patients
the
avec
notes,
nous
and
pour
our
bien
artists are
relever les
extremely
défis
patient with us
de ces
to
plans-là.
take on
Et
the
en parlant
challenge
des
as well for
plans,
these shots. And talking of these
des
shots,
plans ambitieux, on a ici aussi un
ambitious
screenshot
shots, here we've got a
un autre
screenshot
plan, un autre plan d'attaque
of
qui est un peu
another
plus des plus
shot,
gros aussi.
which
Et
is one of the
ça vous
biggest.
montre aussi, nous on utilise TV Paint comme outil
And we use
d'animation. Donc
T-Paint
toute
as well
l'animation et les décors
as a
se font sur
tool.
TV Paint. Au début de la production,
Yeah,
Félix
so
avait créé
TV
une
Paint,
boss qu'on peut voir
and
dans le coin, et LMMP outils 2021. Ouf.
so 20.
Et puis donc tout le monde
21, we've been
utilise
using
cette
this since
brosse pour
2021.
avoir une cohérence au niveau des
Everybody
lignes.
uses this paintbrush
Pour le
to have
clean,
the
c'est ça qu'on utilise.
same line. So this is what you use
Aussi,
for
je
the
vous
clean.
montre ce screenshot pour vous montrer à quel
And
point il faut
this
être
screenshot
précis
shows you how
dans
precise you've
l'organisation des
got to
fichiers.
be in
Donc,
the
une grande
organization
partie
of
de mon
the
travail ici,
files.
c'est travailler
A large part
avec
of my work
David, en fait,
is
pour
working with
trouver,
David
on a
to
travaillé pour
find,
trouver des
we
codes de
worked
l'écriture,
to
pour
find
avoir un langage
the
commun.
codes so that we're all speaking the same language. And in compositing, there are very few people working on compositing. So for it to be as fluid as possible,
de tenir l'organisation des fichiers le plus possible.
I make sure that the organization is as tight as possible. So more concretely speaking, what happens? So how does it go from the animatics through to compositing? As we've already mentioned, sometimes you've got phases. We've got an ambitious project. So sometimes two things can bump into each other, but here, the layout and compositing is the same, animatic, and then we move into the rough, clean tie down, often done by one single person. Then we go to the in-betweens, and then colors, light and shadow, and then the compositing for the details, for the fascinating details. David will tell you all of this. Another example.
Ici aussi, voilà un autre
Here as well.
plan qui passe par toutes les étapes.
Another shot.
Et je voulais faire
which shows you all the phases.
Parce que comme vous
And I
constatez,
wanted to make a quick mention of light and shade, because we've got a different way of bringing out the colors in these productions. So we don't go into color of hair, color of skin. We've just got a general outline of the characters. And then we bring out the details of the face. And Félix and I realized
à quel point
light and shade was a big surprise on the production, but it's essential. But we developed something specific really for the film, because it doesn't only give the direction of light, but the volumes that you used to get the wonderful results that you can see here.
Juste une petite blague pour vous.
And just a little funny thing, an inside joke that we've got in the studio.
Chaque artiste peut s'amuser.
As you can see, each artist can choose any color before it goes to compositing. So you have
on aime bien dire au studio qu'il pourrait exister quelque part une version de la
sugary colors, these sweet colors, and all sorts of things like that.
And
after the compositing, the choice of the final color is done through a discussion with Félix and the compositing team. With David.
Jean a parlé de la façon comment on fonctionne au studio. Félix aussi.
So Jean talked about the way we do compositing in the studio, but Félix too. But I wanted to say that I don't think that a production would be possible without the way that Embuscade works. And Félix said that since the very first project that I worked on,
Donc, effectivement, c'est beaucoup plus horizontal, une communication
it's much more horizontal, it's open communication.
Félix, il a une vision très claire.
And Félix has got a very clear vision, but he's very open to proposals as well from all the different artists. So if anybody has got a good answer, a good proposal, it'll be listened to. And if it's the best for the film, the idea is to make the best film possible. So from that point of view, everybody
Tout le monde est une partie précieuse.
Everybody is a precious member of the team.
On est vraiment chanceux de trouver une équipe.
We're really very lucky to find an incredible team, multi-skilled artists who can do lots of tasks. We've got artists that do backgrounds or animation. There are assistants that do shading and light. As well as line drawing. So to finish, I'd like to present the team, the Morales team, or let them introduce themselves.
Action. Oh. Oh. Perfect. Bravo. Yes. Yay. Action.
Je m'appelle Julie Charette, je suis artiste décor
I'm
et
Julie
animatrice sur
Charles,
la mort
and I'm
existante.
animator and background artist. I'm Shelley Rodoni, and I'm assistant animator on Death Does Not Exist. I'm also assistant animator and
Bonjour,
assistant
je suis
compositor.
Louis Ballard. Salut,
I'm Louis
mon nom est
Ballard.
Martin.
Mon nom c'est
Hi,
Félix.
I'm
Bonjour, mon nom est
Martin.
Edric Talbot.
I'm
Salut,
Colette.
je m'appelle Noah. Mon nom c'est Agathe
I'm Noah.
Bonjour, je suis Véro. Je
I'm
m'appelle
Noah.
Renée Inès.
Mon nom c'est
I'm Renée Inez. I'm David Setz. I'm Marinaccio.
Annie Frani.
My name is Kate.
I'm Annie Freni. My name's Kate.
Mon nom est Tigris. Moi c'est Jenny.
Sigrid, Jenny, Antonio,
Je m'appelle Mathilde. Raquel Sosnetti. Je m'appelle
Mathieu,
Valentine Dumais. Je suis animatrice.
Valentine Dumej, and I am animator on Death Does Not Exist.
Félix,
Félix.
peux-tu nous faire part des principaux choix de mise en scène que tu as
Tell us about your main staging choices here in terms of director, and tell us the very visual standpoint or approaches that you made from the outset. What was your approach? Yes, I'll try to be brief, and obviously I'm going to ask David to be brief too, because we're slightly behind time. So very quickly, I've already told you a little bit about the fact that the film is built on the notion of opposition between the stability of the real world and the more shifting, unstable world. So the immobility, which is shown by the statues, as you can see on the screen, and which is the very organic, living, moving character of the forest, which is always in motion. So when about the staging and the choices that I made, there was this duality between the flat shots and also the depth of field. So again, the colors are painted on paper, and the approach here is very much like screen printing. That means it's a bit you are passing again and again with different layers of colors back and again. Some colors stand out, some don't. So that was something that we used in both the design but also in the compositing phase. So that helped us to bring out certain elements so they could stand out. Also, this approach, personally speaking, is that it really trains the eye of the viewer to look at certain different elements, so they can focus on the character of the background and see it in two dimensions. Again, when thinking about the movement, the animation side, the notion of shadow, the notion of light, again, it enables us to bring those colors out with a different depth of field. That is the 3-day fairs. What I hope the audience will think. We hope that they will find it very pleasant to look at this effect, because this is an adventure film, but at the same time, it's not just that. There are calmer, softer, more dialogue-based scenes. It's not just this fast-paced animation and fast-paced adventure. So it's not some sort of chase from start to finish. There's more reflective scenes. So I'm going to speed up a bit here. So this film was inspired by painting, Quebec painting. So contemporary painters such as here, Marcel Ferron. So he's from the 60s, and one of the periods I really like of him is this what we see, the images here, the graphic style. René Richard, so he's a Swiss painter, and again he moved to Canada, and he painted a lot the countryside around Quebec. Very much anchored in his work is very much anchored in figurative art and colors. Here, there's another example of a painter who's very expressive, and you can see almost faces in the landscape. And here, another example of a contemporary artist, Pierre Dorian. Here again, there are different spaces, light and dark. There's contrast, there's duality. And Marion Marchal, so she is a contemporary painter, and again, she works in a very figurative style. There's a paradox in her work. There's this sort of joie de vivre, but again, this sort of dark side. And these were the inspirations that really accompanied me and helped me throughout the project. So we try to sort of keep open in terms of the type of line, the artistic approach. I like the backgrounds and the characters to have the sort of open-ended side, so there's freedom to change throughout. We're always trying to keep a degree of realism, but also a surreal
de
element
préserver la
to this
capacité
film. That means keep our ability to be expressive,
d'abstraction, donc d'où mes
to
références
have
au
this
campus.
abstract dimension to the film. And I think, that is part of the stance that I took from the outset here as a director. The colors have to vibrate. There has to be a sense of realism, but also surrealism. It has to be abstract. So the different situations also bring out the duality found in the narrative. So there's a very direct line, if you can see, from start to finish. And it's this joy, if you like, in terms of color, is something that you see running through the story. So here we're going to look at some extracts from the film, and these were some of the visual tests that we did at the outset. And this was at the stage when we were trying to find funding. And here is the result of some of the first tests that we carried out. This was in 2021, I think. Obviously, we've moved on since. Maybe earlier, 2020.
Je veux quelques années légères. Les mots simples pour l'ennemi. Je veux soumettre la bêtise et son triomphe à la pudeur de ceux qui doutent. Je veux faire de ma force la condition d'un équilibre. Je veux faire de ma rage la maison qui nous manque.
Alors rapidement, vous voyez donc les choses ont assez évolué, mais il y avait un certain esprit.
As you can see, things obviously have moved forward a lot, but you can really see that's the starting point when we, were carrying out the initial art tests, and that was when we were looking for funding, because obviously it's no easy thing funding such a project. And we were very persevering, and we managed in the end. So we had Olivier Calvert on board for the sound and the music. So we've been working with him for almost 20 years. So we really couldn't have done this project without him. We count on him. Yeah, I haven't put my glasses on yet, so that's telling. So obviously there were narrative constraints, and there was a big challenge, and there was violence, but we wanted to really take a step back, and we decided to really focus on the notion of violence at very specific points in the film. Why? Well, it helped to make the characters very dry, brutal, really stand out at those points. And again, this is scattered throughout the film, these moments we bring out, and this, what I'm talking about here is obviously the sound design, which comes out and underlines, underpins the action. And obviously worked with Gabriel, and we asked for a very interesting sort of blend between Schubert and Cold Wave, so something quite harsh, something quite biting, acerbic. So it's come out with some wonderful sounds, and we'll see where it takes us eventually. So that was what we asked for the outset for the music. As for the compositing, yes, that's something very important. That's part of the writing process. We've got movements, we've got background, we've got the motion, but then we re-establish, if you like, a form of hierarchy at the compositing stage. And obviously working here with our dear colleague David Setz, who worked on the compositing here. If you could tell us a bit about what you did. Thank you, Félix. Hello, everyone. My name is David. So I have been on the team since the beginning of the production phase. So that means the making of, if you like, when we began working just after the animatic phase was completed. So I've been working on the compositing side. That means I look after the workflow from the drawings from TV paints that come from the animators themselves and the background artists working on the film until the final image. So that is the section of the pipeline I work on. So in compositing, there are several challenges, very much so developing a visual language for the film during the production phase. whilst production is ongoing.
d'aller-retour entre
So there's a lot of coming and going between
lui-même
the
et
sort of
aussi,
with me between Felix and myself. We talk a lot about the decisions being made during the compositive phase. So back and forth, it's an ongoing dialogue.
garder les choses,
Obviously, we try to keep things
de
open. It's an
façon que
open
les musiciens,
dialogue. You've got to use your intuition
pouvoir
as well
expérimenter les
throughout to
différentes
be able to
solutions, les
test,
différentes
try things out,
couleurs,
new
les différents
solutions, different palettes of colors, different
on ne veut pas
approaches.
introduire trop de contraintes,
We don't want
c'est
to
vrai,
bring on
aux
too many
artistes, plutôt
constraints,
dans le
obviously,
processus.
for
Toutefois,
the
on veut
artist
avancer,
too early on
finaliser
in
les
the
choses,
process, but nonetheless, we want to move forward and
quand
finalize things when
l'autre
possible.
priorité, c'est de maintenir la
The other
flexibilité
priorities is to
face à
keep
la complexité.
flexible, especially when we come up against
Vous allez voir,
complex
les décors
challenges.
et les personnages,
As you can
les
see, our
traitements qu'on
backgrounds
fait,
and our
il s'agit de beaucoup de
characters and the
calques.
way in which
Donc,
we've
la
used
c'est
them.
un
There's a lot of
processus assez
repetition,
raffiné, et donc
and it's a very refined
ça risque de devenir
process.
très complexe, même
And
quand
it can be very
on le sait pas
complex at times by
dans des
definition.
projets.
And this is,
Donc,
inherent in
on
all
se
types
permet
of projects
de
of this
garder les choses
scale.
en
So what we
mutation
try to
dans le temps.
do is,
On veut bien
keep
séparer
things
le
changing.
travail de
We'd
couleur
like to
et le travail qu'on appelle
separate the
mécanique,
work on the
le
color
masking,
side and
choses
all the
plus
masking, the mechanical side,
collées
if
aux
you
formes.
like, everything to do with the shape of the character, the form.
Pas
We
répéter
separate
le
that from the
travail, bien
color
entendu. Donc, il
so that we
il
don't
faut le
repeat
faire
ourselves
efficace
too much.
parce
So we're trying to
qu'on
be
est un petit
efficient,
projet,
obviously,
projet
because it's a
ambitieux.
small team. We've got a
Donc,
big
on cherche
project that
toujours à
we're
tricher
working on
avec
here.
les
So we're
artistes.
always trying to find a better ways of
On
working
va
and
parler un
finding
peu de
shortcuts.
comment ça
Now I'm going to
se
talk
fabrique.
about how
Le
it's
tout commence
made
avec
in
ces
terms of
38
compositing. Well,
scans de
it
papier
begins
peint.
with these
Chaque
38
pixel du film
scanned versions of painted
est une
paper.
combinaison de ces textures-là.
So
On
each is
utilise
a
jamais
combination,
des
every
textures
image is a
numériques pour
combination
manipuler
of these
une
different
couleur.
colors.
C'est
And we
vraiment
use
juste
them
des
to create the
superpositions des
colors.
textures.
And it's basically, we superimpose, we layer up these different tiles, if you like, to create
Donc, ça
the
crée
final color and texture.
une contrainte assez importante
So this is a
dans notre
constraint,
démarche.
obviously, and a very big constraint in our approach from the outset.
Mais ça nous laisse travailler un peu
But at the same time,
comme peintre. On pense
we
aux
work
couleurs.
like painters,
Donc,
if you like.
il
We're
y a
working with the colors, we're
une
building them up from this
façon de travailler
palette.
commun entre l'équipe.
So we work together in
Mais
the same way within the
vu
team. We
qu'on
have a
ces
common
contraintes,
approach.
c'est très simple
Because we have this very
d'essayer
big
de
constraint,
différentes
it's
choses
very
et
easy to
d'explorer
move from
d'autres
one thing to the
possibilités.
next because we're all working
Et
on
on
the same
reste
page and we can explore
dans
new
notre
solutions. So
signature
that gives us
visuelle
versatility.
qui
But at the
fonctionne.
same time, we can put our
Donc la
personal stamp
contrainte
on what
sert
we
à
do.
renforcer et
So,
promoter
yes,
cette signature.
the constraint on the one hand is an obstacle, but it's
Par contre, les
also a
produits,
driver
des
for creative
défis
expression.
qui pourront
There are
coûter
obviously
cher
many
au niveau
different
de la complexité.
challenges that
Mais
make things very
faut dire
complex
que ces
by
derniers
nature.
points
But that
sont
said,
importants.
it's very important to have those constraints.
Le technique de base, pour colorer un
So the
élément, un seul
basic
élément,
technique
on voit
is when you have
voilà,
one element in the film, for
et la forme
example,
qui découpe la
there
texture.
is the shape. So we cut
Et
out the
ensuite, la
shape
texture doit
from
être
the texture,
placée et
and
taillée
then the texture is then
selon,
superimposed on top,
selon
depending on our
la mise en
needs,
scène, selon les choix
depending on the
créatifs.
staging or the choices made by the director.
Mais on peut imaginer que, vu le nombre
Well, if you consider the number
voilà,
of different elements that we have
le
in the
travail
film,
multiplie
the different
des fois
ingredients, you
par
have to
une
multiply that
centaine
approach
de cas,
by,
200, même
100
204
or so
dans un décor détaillé.
repeated, if you like, pages
Alors,
superimposed for the same shot. So there's a lot of
voici
layering
quelques
up.
exemples de décors
Here are a
dans
few examples
les super
for the
couleurs choisies par les
backgrounds.
artistes avant.
Obviously, these amazing colors that were chosen by the artists, the color
Et puis,
artists.
lorsqu'on commence
And when we
plan, Félix pourrait
begin
m'envoyer une
working on
référence
a
de
shot,
couleur.
well, Félix would send
Je vais vous
me a color
présenter un peu
reference,
un
a
des
source of inspiration. So I'm going to
plans
show you one of the
qu'on a
first
attaqué.
shots that we worked on from the
Donc ici,
outset.
mon premier
So
essai.
here
J'essaie
is my
de
first
faire un
test, my
accord
first
avec ce que
attempt
je voyais comme
to
palette
blend, if you like,
avant.
what I saw from the
Et voici la
colors
réponse à
sent to me
Félix.
by Félix.
On peut voir
And
que
this is
j'étais
how
très loin.
Félix then
À l'époque, je
touched it
manquais un
up
peu
and
la pleine
altered it
compréhension
somehow. So you can see
du
actually I
vocabulaire
was
que
almost there,
j'utilisais
but not
dans
quite there.
la
So you
palette.
can see that, sometimes we're
Mais
not
j'espère que ça
necessarily
va mieux
using the
maintenant,
same
Félix,
palette, and it's
très
important to
présent.
work better so that we're on the same
Mais
page and we
l'important,
can
c'est
reach
qu'un
that balance
dialogue s'établit.
immediately. So as I said before, there's a dialogue, obviously, constant dialogue between myself and Félix. We can come up with suggestions, we bounce ideas off each other. It's a process, and that's part of the compositing work, and we call it the Félixification, endearingly we call it such, because it really is this ping pong, if you like, between Félix and ourselves on the compositing team. So here is a version, 100 versions later. This is after a lot of going between back and forth and discussions with Félix.
évoluer.
You may not see the difference very clearly, but there's a very subtle difference, and this is the final
On voit rien
result.
parce qu'on remplit l'avant-plan avec de la
So here we go. We don't see any of the background because in the foreground we have the
Les décors se
characters. No,
révèlent.
I'm joking. No, you can see the backgrounds. They do reveal themselves nonetheless as the characters move.
Mais de toute façon,
But that said,
la félixification, c'est pour trouver la
Felixification is trying to find the template for all the different shots for the same scene. That's what it's all about. So once we've got those frame points, those templates,
de transférer ces principes.
then we try to transfer the color approach onto the other templates. So again, there's a lot of ping-ponging going back and forth between myself and Félix, taking into consideration the new needs in terms of the directorial choices and staging for each scene. How do we do this in an efficient way? Well, we try and keep that flexibility. And so we need to find the means to do so. You know, it's not easy. So our solution is this. It's said the comp doesn't exist, compositing doesn't exist, so it's called After Effects for the script. So it helps you to go faster, basically. It's a digital tool that speeds things up. So how does it work? So I'm going to quickly show you here the different steps, the different features on this software. So the first thing you do is that you have on the left all of the different shots, and you click on a magic button, and you've got all the different default textures. So this is the starting point for what we call Felixification. And from this, we work on the different colors, and we add them to the image. Obviously, as you can see in the script, we talked earlier about everything is very much organized for the layering of the different colors. So it's all laid out from the outset. The next step is the pickerify. It's a little square that we call a picker, and we can identify a different stage or area of the screen. And once we pinpointed the particular area, it's easier to find afterwards in the timeline of the project. So honestly, you know, this is such a major time saver, this software, for each shot, for each superimposed shot, for every scene. So what we can do thanks to this software is to, if you like, transfer the recipe for the different colors onto a different shot or onto the character. You know, it's not just copy and paste. You know, there's a very easy way of doing it. So we've got this very simple and quick way to transfer and layer back onto each what we call automatical compilation. So thanks to the click of a button, we can identify the shot that we're looking for, that we want to work on. Then we can recognize the different names in order, in priority order. Then we transfer the colors on top. So we can, for example, call up the source color. And then what we use is called a combination in AutoComp. Again, this is what we call the picker party. This is another phase. It's a really quick method, basically to transfer all of these colors. So you choose, for example, purple or mauve. You transpose it onto the orange and you click. So here, for example, in real time, what I'm doing here, I'm just showing you an example of how I transfer and paste in the colors into the shot, into the scene. So as you can see, there's a context here, a framework in which I'm working, and then we built up the colors. Are you near the end of your presentation, David? Yes. So to conclude, I want to show you this amazing shot here. It was a very complex one to make. You know, it was originally a 2D scene that was then put into 3D using After Effects. And the challenge here was trying to match the camera movements with the movements of the character that had actually been developed before we'd made the scene. So we had to superimpose the two elements. We had to simplify things because we were working in 2D and then 3D. And what I'm trying to do now is I'm now going to take away all of these different layers, the 2,000 different layers that I used, and I hope that we'll manage to complete this scene. It's a pretty tricky exercise, so if anybody in the room has any advice, I'm a taker. Thank you very much, David.
Comme nous sommes en retard,
So when you're late, as we are now, I'm going to have to very quickly here on my conclusion. You know, this was a human adventure. You know, we're coming out of the tunnel, if you like, of the production side. We've all, you know, got a bit older. We got, you know, we got bad backs, but we've built very strong friendships, and we really have come to almost the end of the process. No, I'm joking. No, I'm half joking actually. It's, you know, I just wanted to recognize the joy of living and working with this team over these years, you know, for all their work, their intelligence. And I also like to acknowledge our collaboration with MIYU Productions, Emmanuel-Alain, RAYNAL, and Pierre BAUSSARON. It's been extraordinary working with them on this project. And there's also Élodie, Charlie, and Clara who are in the room. So I'd just like to say hello to you. You know, thank you to them for their input. So, without further ado, I'd like to present to you basically a mix, a mashup of different scenes and takes and shots that will give you a taste of what the film is going to look like. You know, this is obviously these are not completed, they're not finished final versions, so obviously be indulgent. This is just to give you a sneak preview of what you will see in the final film.
Merci, merci infiniment.
Thank you
Alors,
so much.
le temps est venu d'entendre vos questions et remarques. Et
Your questions and
pour
comments.
préparer la première, je voudrais vous remercier d'avoir
And while you
partagé
prepare the first one, I'd like to thank you for sharing
que vous mettez
this
à servir vos
happy
convictions.
passion
C'est un très beau moment
that
de
you
soins de
use to the service of your
dans la salle,
convictions.
une
So,
première question, s'il vous plaît.
are there any questions from the audience?
Monsieur, premier rang, si vous voulez bien juste vous présenter.
On the first row, if you could just say who you are so that we
Avec un
know.
micro, ce sera encore mieux.
With a mic, it's even better.
Je m'appelle Noé, je vous ai entendu
I'm called Noé.
dire réalisme.
I heard you talking
Est-ce que
about
vous pourriez développer
irrealism. Can you go into
c'est dans
more
le cas
detail
de
on
mort
this?
n'existe pas, c'était un rapport à la fois une figuration qui représente le
Well,
réel.
it's sort of figuration that represents something real, you know, two people walking on a path in the woods, if you like. But by simulating two things, blending one into the other, you know, whether it's by light or shadow or movement, you get the impression of unrealism. So you get a lot of freedom in what we do, the way we develop our figuration. So it's a distance as well. So the forest is a real forest, but it's also a projection. You know, it's got its own psyche, you know, that Hélène has painted and that we explore.
Mademoiselle, merci.
Yeah, young lady.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Héloïse. Je voulais juste
I'm
savoir,
called Eloise.
vous avez dit
I
que
just
vous
wanted to
vouliez
know,
avoir une charte assez
you
précise,
said
assez
that
tôt. pour
You
votre
wanted
film,
to.
mais vous avez aussi dit que vous vouliez vous laisser une marge de manœuvre jusqu'à la
You
fin
said
pour
that you
pouvoir
wanted to leave
retoucher le
yourself some room for
compositing.
maneuver
Du coup, je
to
voulais
deal with
savoir
the
à quel moment vous
compositing.
aviez
But
incorporé le
when
compositing
did you
dans votre
incorporate
process
the
pour
compositing
pouvoir avoir quelque
into
chose
the
d'à la fois
process
flexible et précis.
to have something flexible and precise?
Si je comprends bien, à quel point est-ce qu'on a
So
commencé
when did we
compositing dans le processus?
begin the compositing in the process?
Ouais. Je veux dire que la marge de manœuvre disparaît
The
rapidement.
room for maneuver soon
Donc,
disappears, particularly at the moment.
c'était de la
But the
garder
idea
ouverte le
is
plus que
to
possible
keep
pour
it,
pouvoir
keep as much wiggle room
avoir
as
la
possible,
possibilité
so that you
d'explorer,
can have an
même si
opportunity to explore,
la
even
vision est
if
très spécifique et très forte.
the vision is very specific and very strong.
Il y a beaucoup de petits choix
And there's a lot of
qu'on
little
qu'on fait,
choices that
surtout que
we
Félix
make,
fait.
particularly
Et en
Felix
même
makes,
temps,
and at
il
the
faut
same
continuer.
time,
Mais on avance le côté.
yeah,
On a trouvé le moyen d'avancer
we
le
find
côté
the way of moving forward
mécanique.
the
Donc, ce qu'on voit
mechanical
ici, par
side of
exemple,
things, what we see here,
on veut bouger
for
les
instance,
ombres et lumières en bas
is we
en
can
fonction
change
de la lumière d'un
the
feu.
light
Donc,
and shade
on
at
peut
the
faire ça,
bottom,
trouver les recettes pour
but
ça
we can do that. We can
pendant
find
que
the
l'anime
recipe for that
se finalise
while
et
the
pendant que
animation is being
les couleurs
finalized and
sont
while
au
the
travail.
colors are being
On
worked on.
avance, on garde le compositing quand même. On a commencé, David est là depuis le
So
début de
we
la
keep
production,
compositing,
parce qu'il est
as we
également
said, we
animateur.
have it at the beginning
Donc, il a animé certaines
because
séquences. Puis,
David was an animator
ici,
as
on
well,
le
so he
composting
animated
se fait
some
au fur et à
sequences.
mesure. On le
And
corrige. Il y a eu des bouts,
compositing
des
was
centaines
done
de versions. Et on
as we went
essaie,
along,
dans la mesure du possible,
but
d'être
we
à jour
try as far as
avec le
possible
compositing, ce qui n'est pas tout
to
à
be
fait
up
le
to
cas.
date with our compositing, but it's not always the case.
Oui, bonjour. Ah oui, bonjour.
Yeah, hello.
Bravo, c'est sublime.
Congratulations,
Est-ce
it's
que vous pouvez juste
beautiful,
nous
it's
parler un peu de
sublime.
votre collaboration avec MIYU, savoir
Could
ce
you
qui s'est
tell us
fait chez
about
eux et
working, the
comment
way
ça
you're
s'est
working
passé?
with MIYU?
Bien
You
géré.
know, the way it went. I'm sure it went very well, but
Bien
you know,
géré.
what was done
Avec
there and
MIYU,
so on.
c'est d'abord une
Well, with
rencontre
MIYU,
avec
it
Emmanuel-Alain et
was
Pierre,
first of all we met
qui ont eu
Emmanuel-Alain
des
and Pierre,
versions
and
du scénario, qui m'ont fait des retours.
because we had
Donc, on a
versions of the script
participé
they had
déjà
notes on and things
ils ont
like this,
participé au développement.
and they took part in the
Ensuite, au niveau
development.
de la fabrication elle-même, nous, on leur a
And in terms
donné
of the actual
des
production
scènes qui
itself, we
sont très
gave them
exigeantes à l'animation,
some very
mais qui sont
demanding
un peu un peu
drawings
assez
to
légers, par
animate.
exemple. C'est des scènes qui sont légèrement
So this
en
one, for
retrait du
instance, as you
récit.
can see here.
Ils n'avaient pas les
So
mêmes
these are
exigences
in
de
the sort of
continuité
background of the story. So you don't have the same
par
demands
exemple,
in
s'ils
terms of
avaient eu
continuity
une scène
as
avec les
if they'd
personnages
had
principaux, le
a scene
dialogue,
with the lead
le
characters, the
raffinement du jeu des
dialogue,
personnages. Donc, ils ont
the
pris en charge
refined
des scènes
performance of the
comme ça,
characters. So they did
d'animation
scenes like
plus
this
libres, mais
with
pour lesquelles nous leur
freer
avons fourni un
animation,
layout très précis,
but we gave them a very
qu'ils ont
specific
pu
layout
développer ensuite. Donc, on leur a donné un
and
cadre
that they could
strict,
develop that
mais
afterwards. So
ils l'ont utilisé comme
we gave
plateforme,
them
c'est
a
très bien.
strict
Et
framework which
c'était
they
notre
used
approche.
as a
Donc, ils étaient très
platform.
préparés.
And that was our
Ils nous ont
approach. So
envoyé
it
des
was
scènes qui sont
very
un peu
prepared.
endommagées
We
aussi. Ils ont
sent
pris en
them
charge aussi un personnage au complet.
scenes like this. They
L'animation
had
d'un
some
personnage
full
depuis une vieille
characters as
date.
well.
Personnage
So the old
crucial
woman,
parce que
a crucial
attaquant
character
et attaqué,
because
chacun porte une part de la vérité du film.
everybody, whether she's attacked or the attacker, everybody has
Ça
their
répond à
own
votre question.
vision of that. Does that answer your question?
Bonjour.
Hello.
Donc, ma question, c'est dans un monde où le cut-out est
My question is that in a
ultra
world
présent, et
where
surtout,
there's so much cutout,
en fait, j'ai l'impression qu'en
or the cutout is so present.
Amérique du Nord, on est à fond sur le
In
cut-out.
North America,
En Europe
it's a
aussi.
big trend at the moment in Europe too.
Embuscade, pour l'instant, je pense qu'au Québec, c'est le seul
Embuscade in
studio
Quebec, I
en
think you're the only
2D
studio
que j'ai
in
jamais vu.
traditional 2D
Est-ce
that
que
I've
c'est
ever
quelque
seen.
chose qui
Is it something
est
that
toujours répandu, en tout cas au
is
Québec, au Canada?
still done in Quebec, in Canada? There we are.
Mais sans fausse modestie, en fait, je crois que
Well, without
pour
any
ça, au
false
Canada,
modesty,
en fait, bon,
I think we're the only ones in Canada
trad.
who do only traditional.
Mais c'est un choix éditorial, mais aussi un choix de vie.
But it's an editorial choice. It's a
Commercial,
difficult choice. We don't do any.
On travaille
We're not service
uniquement
providers. We don't do any
dans
commercial
une logique de
work.
financement public ou d'institutions
So-
de cinéma, ce qui fait en sorte que on travaille avec des moyens qui sont
So we
moindres,
work
évidemment.
with fewer
Direction,
resources, in terms of public funding, things like this. We haven't got
une
the
logique de
same as
fabrication,
other
comme on l'a
people,
montré,
but
qui est quand même plus
we try to model through. We're more
plus ingénieuse, mais
ingenious
c'est un
in a
choix.
way,
En fait.
and
C'est un choix
we
éditorial.
adapt
On a la
more.
chance au Québec
It's an
et au
industrial
gouvernement
choice
d'avoir quand même
in
des belles
Canada
structures
and
de
Quebec.
financement.
We've got
Financement
good
difficile, de plus en
financing
plus,
structures.
comme partout
It's
ailleurs,
becoming
mais
increasingly difficult, like everywhere else, of course.
les deux institutions
But
principales, quand même, soutiennent
the two institutions
encore relativement bien
support
le
us
cinéma. Donc,
relatively well.
qui nous permet quand
we
même de se
support the
projeter
cinema well. So
dans le futur,
this
même si à
helps
chaque
us
fois,
to,
c'est un combat relevé. Donc,
it's a renewed combat every
chaque
time.
long métrage
So each
est un
feature
horizon rallongé en fait sur le studio.
is an extended horizon on the existence of the
Sans dire qu'on vit
studio.
au jour le jour, on vit quand même
But
de production.
I'm not saying we live from hand to mouth, but we do live from one production to the
C'est
next.
que des films d'auteur, courts et longs. En fait,
Shorts and longs are only auteur
c'est un
films.
choix de vie aussi.
There aren't house. It's a choice. It's not an economic choice because it would be a very bad choice if it was. But it's a choice of how we want to live our lives, if you like.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Catherine.
Hello, I'm Catherine.
Un très joli film et une très jolie démarche. Et je voulais vous poser une question sur. Vous avez parlé de
So you talked about parallels of oppositions that you have in the film.
Très politique. Et j'aimerais
I
bien
think
juste
it's
savoir
very
ce que
political.
représente ces
And
coupures, ces tranches
what
pour vous. Voilà.
do these what does this
J'essaierai
represent for you? Well, I'll try and
C'est le
reply
mot qu'on aura le
briefly.
plus employé cet après-midi, c'est brièvement, je crois.
So I think the word we've used most this afternoon is
Il y a
briefly.
des oppositions formelles qui sont des principes de mise
Yeah, there
en
are formal
scène
oppositions.
qui relèvent davantage du goût, du désir, que je peux
Taste
peut-être
and
écarter.
desires
On va
and
parler des thématiques. Le film est traversé de ce
the
désir
film
de changement,
has
puis
this
aussi
desire
de
for change,
certaine agressivité, disons-le, que
a
vient aussi
certain
de
aggression,
l'attachement et du lien, donc d'une certaine douceur, d'un
a
attachement à la
certain,
vie, quoi, à la tendresse.
attachment to
Film qui,
life as
moi,
well as this gentleness
de
there
façon
that,
très personnelle, porte à la fois mes
from a
ambitions
very
jeunesse
personal point of
et mes
view,
constats
it's
de
got
carrière
my
avec 2 enfants. Je
ambitions
souhaite que
as when I was young,
mes enfants soient
and as
soient
well as a
plus profonds, que mes enfants
40-something
soient heureux.
with 2 kids as well. And what I want most of the world is
Si
for
je
my
crois qu'on
children to be
retrouve ça dans
happy.
le film, le personnage principal vit
So I
ça,
think you find that in
vit
the
ses propres
film.
convictions,
That's what the lead
rencontre une
character in
personne
the film
plus jeune et
lives as well, meeting a younger version
face à
of
face avec la
themselves,
vieille dame qui est la cible de
and
l'attaque,
comes
se
face to
reconnaît
face
aussi.
with
Et
the
ils
old lady
partagent
who
quelque
is
chose,
the
un espace
target
partagé.
of the
Et
attack.
donc
So I
l'idée,
mean,
c'est
you
pas
get
de
this
dire que
shared
tout est
space. So the idea
équivalent,
is
de
not
dire
to
qu'il
say
faut
that everything is
relativiser,
equivalent,
mais
that
c'est de montrer le
that so
caractère
we can
tragique
relativize.
des
We want to show
des
the
grands désirs, des
tragic
convictions
character
profondes,
of
puis
great,
de
deep
nos, à la fois de
convictions
nos
and
idéaux, mais aussi
desires
de nos
and
convictions
our
profondes,
ideals, but of
leur
our
difficile
deep
passage
convictions
dans le
too.
réel,
And
et
it's
puis
difficult
aussi
to
le
pass this
mélange,
into, or to get this
ce que
into
peut produire
reality.
la violence une fois dans le monde,
And
une fois que le monde, dans ce cas-ci, dans le cas du
what
film,
happens in
le
the
monde est
world.
envahi et renversé
The world
par la
is
colère et
invaded,
la
and the
honte
world
de son personnage principal.
turned
Et c'est
upside
un film
down by
tragique.
anger and things.
Pas
So
de
it's a
solution,
tragic film,
sinon celle
which
du lien,
doesn't give a solution,
celle du lien, la
except
valeur
the
l'engagement,
ideas
de
of
l'amitié, de
value, of
l'amour,
commitment, of
de la
friendship,
politique.
of love, and a political commitment.
Devant,
So at the
il
front,
reste peu de temps.
we haven't got much time left. Well, I'll be short.
J'avais une petite question là, tu parlais d'engagement.
I've got a quick question. You're talking about commitment, about what we heard today, and what you said about how you made the film and all that. I thought it was really inspiring and motivating.
Aimé faire après avoir entendu par exemple tous ces
You talked about all these, everything you were saying about the way you, the horizontal organization, the pleasure, working with students.
à l'époque. Vous n'êtes plus étudiant, je sais bien. En tout cas, non, ce que je voulais dire, c'était, je me demandais,
But what
est-ce
I'm
que vous avez ne
trying to
serait-ce
say
que
is that,
pensé au pouvoir
have
que
you
vous pourriez
thought
peut-être avoir
about the power that you could have,
en parlant aussi de comment on fait des films, que
talking about how you make films?
difficile, certes,
It's
mais
possible to
est-ce que
make
vous allez
films like
faire
this.
un
It's
making-of qui est un
difficult.
peu ambitieux,
But you're going
avec
to make a
de
making of which is
motivation, de
ambitious
dire,
with
hey,
a
les
sort
jeunes,
of
il y a
motivation
des
to
grosses
say,
productions
hey,
de
young
films,
guys,
on peut encore vivre comme
you
ça, il
people, it's
faut,
not just the
je pense
big
que vous étiez au
studios.
Canada, c'est dommage. Il n'y avait pas
You're in
d'argent,
Canada.
les talents et les idées sont partout. En
The
tout cas, je me
talent,
demandais
ideas are all over the place.
en tout
But
cas, j'aimerais que vous le fassiez, ne serait-ce que pour
I'd
partager
like
ce
you
truc-là, ce petit
to
message
just to share
ce
this
beau
message.
tu vois, de encourager, motiver les
Great
jeunes.
message to encourage and motivate young
En
people.
fait, le petit montage, merci Luc pour la question.
Thank you for the
Le petit
question.
montage que vous avez vu de
The
l'équipe
little
de Montréal
montage
qui
that
dit bonjour,
you
c'est
saw of everybody
comme
saying
le
hello,
petit,
the team in
premier petit
Montreal.
edit de notre making
That's
of.
my
En effet,
first
on a
edit of our
fait
making
des
of.
entrevues avec des artistes de
We've
l'équipe
made
et
interviews
je
with the
pense que
artists
ça
and the
vaut
team,
effectivement la peine d'aller
and I
même
think it's
peut-être plus loin
worthwhile
pour
going
partager la
further
façon comment on fonctionne parce que c'est
to
pas
share what's going on.
c'est pas répandu et ça devrait peut-être l'être.
Because it's not frequent,
C'est
and maybe it
vraiment,
should be
moi je
more
pense que
frequent.
chez Embuscade en ce moment, c'est un des endroits les plus agréables.
I think it's one of the best places to work, the most pleasant places to work,
Mais c'est vrai,
without
on a eu
being
vraiment
too
une belle
kitsch.
ambiance de
But,
travail et c'est
we've got a great
c'est parce
working
qu'on a
atmosphere,
décidé de travailler de cette
and
façon-là.
it's because we've decided to work that way.
Pour être aussi très honnête, on est exigeant.
Yeah, to be very honest, we're very demanding.
Je le vois, notre équipe est fatiguée.
I can see it. The team is tired.
Je crois doux, respectueux, diversifié,
It's a
ouvert.
very gentle, respect, diversified, open, and that's part of our strength as well, because that gives us energy. But we don't have quotas. Working times are very free. But we've got a production that is demanding, because I want to do top of the range with medium of the range budget. So we try to do top of the range, but whether we succeed or not, I don't know. But the team carries this a lot on their shoulders. But I think it's a team that's like its team in its character, in its stability, and it's based on the generosity of the team.
Ça repose beaucoup
It's built on that. And I think it's built as well on
la capacité des réalisateurs et
the
réalisatrices
ability of the
puis au cœur
directors to be at the very heart of the whirlpool, if you like.
On n'a pas les moyens ou les ressources des grands studios.
We haven't got the resources of the big studios.
On parle souvent qu'on travaille
apart from shorts, perhaps, but we talk more of a workshop. Directors are there and they're in the middle. They're responsible for a lot of things. We support them, but they create a sort of a workshop around them where they make. They've got to know how to make as well. And they've got to be able to animate. They've got to be at the heart of the process. So it's beautiful, but it's clear that it's very demanding for everybody. So I think we've come to the end of this presentation.
Je voudrais, si vous le permettez,
If you
remercier la régie, les équipes de Live Up, les équipes de Citia, Iman et Félix en particulier. Et je pense qu'on sera tous d'accord pour vous adresser nos félicitations.
Would all like to congratulate,
Merci à Patrick qui nous ont accueillis,
give our
qui nous ont
felicitations
accompagnés pour la
to them,
préparation.
and thank you to everybody who has worked with us, particularly Patrick for helping us with this presentation.